All right, welcome back, everybody. You're listening to America Now. I'm Barb Adams, and I'm live here with you for all 3 hours tonight. Thanks so much for listening. Well, I've got 3 hot topics for you tonight, so I hope you stay for the entire show. But if you do miss any part, you can listen to this or any of my shows in their entirety on my website, radioamericanow.com. Well, I'm going to begin tonight with a story about America. Once upon a time, not that long ago, America had less total wealth, but we could still build bridges and roads. We had great schools, and we could care for our sick and the elderly. We looked forward to doing things bigger and better. But now, even though we are more wealthy as a country, have technology that far exceeds some of our wildest dreams, and our workers produce more than ever before, we can no longer afford the things we want and need as a country. The disparity between the haves and have-nots continues to grow, squeezing out the middle class, with the 1% at the top using their wealth to control what the 99% have and have not. On Monday, the Koch brothers announced they will spend nearly $900 million of their own money to help elect candidates to Congress, state legislatures, and to the presidency. We're at a crossroads in America. With all the moneyed interests corrupting our system, there once again exists an opportunity to make changes to our campaign finance process. It's time to restore sanity, beginning with ending the legalized bribery that's running rampant and destroying our great nation. Joining me now is author and former statewide prosecutor and Deputy Attorney General of New Jersey, John J. Higgins. Together, we've formed Practical Solutions for America and ask that you join us here on air and on our new Facebook page to work together to find common ground in solving America's issues. If you'd like to join tonight's discussion, please give us a call, 800-259-5791. Again, 800-259-5791. Hey, John, how you doing?
Good, Barb. How are you tonight?
I am well, thank you. Oh, legalized bribery. Well, you've probably got some opinions on it with your background. What exactly is bribery?
Well, the broad definition of bribery, it's taking, asking, receiving, or taking anything of value that's given to a governmental official in exchange for influencing an official act. In New Jersey, we have almost a broader definition of that. We call it official misconduct. And in that, it can also mean that not only are they getting a benefit, but they can also do something to deprive somebody of a benefit or to injure someone else.
Well, historically, when we look back, we've had times in our history when there have been a lot of corruption and where people have been basically bought, especially by corporations. You look back, the Nixon era, corruption, all that effects of the money in politics go back even to the Roman Republic. But in the U.S., by the late 19th century, corporate money had become so invasive that senators literally were jokingly referred by the companies that supported them. The senator from Standard Oil, etc. And it wasn't until, 1907, Teddy Roosevelt, that corporate contributions to candidates and political parties were banned. That's supposedly still in place today. So what's going on?
Well, if your listeners don't understand, sometimes I do this little brief explanation, is that, we do have 3 branches of government. The Congress and the Senate basically enact the laws. The President, also known as the executive branch, enforces the law. And the Supreme Court and the judiciary interpret the laws. And what has happened is, at this stage, the Supreme Court has done a number of cases where they've interpreted the law that have basically gutted the power of the bills that were put in through the legislature and signed off by the president. So the floodgates have opened all over again, and in ways I think that are not taking into account what the realities of the modern world are. When these political campaigns are costing such tremendous amounts of money that, it's sickening when you think about the amount of money that just goes into a political campaign. The other real problem is that even if it isn't the Supreme Court at times, the people who are passing or creating the laws are the ones who are the targets of the law. So you can imagine how complicated that gets. So they have their own loopholes, or basically get out of jail free kind of scenarios where they can collect money pretty much with abandon and not have any consequence.
Yeah, and it's really hard to track a lot of this money because many times, even like in the last election cycle, a lot of that money coming in, it was never disclosed where it came from.
Oh, absolutely, and there's all these walls in place. When you look into this kind of thing, there are still, components of the laws that are in place where somebody can only give something like $2,600 to a campaign, but somehow these campaigns are collecting, it's $1.2 billion to get the presidency in 2000. Now it's up to $2.6 billion. Everybody would have to be contributing money if they were strictly adhering to these rules, and so what happens is that the elected officials are spending most of their time, or a good portion of their time, running around collecting money from donors.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's become their new job. This is an industry. The money, the funding has become its own industry.
Oh, absolutely. And I just read something before we went on the air that with Romney dropping out, Chris Christie and Jeb Bush are hot right after the donors, and we're almost 2 years out from the presidential election. I mean, the whole government's got to be so convoluted now that the focus no longer is on governing; it's about how to collect money so you can run and campaign.
Yeah, but and what's even worse is, and I think we've talked about this before, it's incestuous. These PACs are basically created by these politicians themselves. They create their own PACs to get the money in. This is crazy.
Well, that's the big joke that's going around in New Jersey right now, because the PAC that Chris Christie created basically gives you the letters of LMFAO, which anybody who's on AOL or on the computer much knows is laughing my blank ass off. And but it's like Leadership Matters for America or something. And he's the honorary chairperson, and his political operatives are the ones running the PAC underneath. So you've got to think of what is the conversation that goes on between these guys raising money from these donors. It's like, oh, you love my guy? You're just going to give me all this money because he's such a wonderful guy?
Yeah.
There's got to be some stuff that's going on that is nefarious in its own right. I don't know how else it can't be that they don't owe them something.
Well, yeah, and the question is, how can they not owe? I mean, corporations are businesses. Bottom line, they're there to make money. And the only things they invest in, they hope, bring them profits one way or the other. It's an investment. They expect a return.
Exactly, and particularly, you and I have discussed this with term limits and whatever, is that if you think of it in terms of a long term where somebody's going to go get reelected, probably more so in the scenarios of the Congress and the Senate, is that, if they don't please their donors this time, do you really think they're going to get the money next time?
Of course not. Of course not. So in other words, all of these politicians, as soon as they get in there, all they're thinking about is re-election, basically. This is a career path for them, not to serve the people who elected them to get in there, but to serve those who are funding them to keep them in there to get their pensions in the long run. It's really frustrating. All right, America Now continues after the break. Stay with us. All right, everybody, you're listening to America Now. I'm joined by John Higgins. We're discussing PACs and possibly legalized bribery that goes on here in America. And, John, corporations and PACs, we're talking about how they give the money to the candidates. And supposedly now under Citizens United, that the idea was that the campaign finances were in place to prevent corruption. But, it just doesn't make any sense to me. How can it not be corrupt? And with these PACs, are they here to stay? Is this something we're just going to have to deal with? I think,
unfortunately, for right now, it's what the reality is. And as a matter of fact, in some ways, they've expanded in these things called super PACs. So generally, a PAC is, I think the idea behind it, if you look at it without the idea of, giving money, or trying to skirt something, was that the idea was to collect money and then, spend it, to advocate for a position you may have. But what happened is that the politicians have done them as basically preliminary campaign funding sources. So they'll pay for travel and whatever, hire their staff and whatever as they're, getting ready to do the run, because they're not an official candidate yet. So that stuff doesn't kick in. There are some limits that are in there. I don't think they can give money to a candidate within 3 months of a primary or a general election or whatever. But when you're 2 years out and you can collect all this money, this allows them to have operating expenses to, push their candidacy.
Yeah, what about there in New Jersey? Because you were talking about Christie, and he's spending a lot of his time right now outside of New Jersey, I've noticed.
Oh, it's I mean, you have to scratch your head if you're a resident of New Jersey, because I think he's out of the state more than he's in the state, although that may not be true in terms of actual days. But every time you turn around, he's going on a trip someplace else. He was doing all this fundraising for another type of PAC, the Republican Governors Association. And he collected in the last, I guess, a little bit more than a year that he was in there. It was $117 million from going around the country. Now, that certainly has no benefit to the state of New Jersey. We're paying a governor to govern. I mean, our state is in terrible shape when it comes to what's going on with the government, but he certainly has time to go around the country and raise all of this money.
So is all of this legal? Because obviously Christie isn't the only one. A lot of them are doing this kind of stuff. They're out there just rolling in the money, bringing it all in and helping dole it out to other candidates that are, of their party or that support their agenda, whatever that may be, or looking forward to their next leap like Christie, possibly the presidency or whatever. That's all legal, right? They can do any of this.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I tried to stress when we first talked was that, it's the politicians who write these laws. So it's no wonder that, there are still means that they can use to go and continue the normal thing that they would be doing to go collect all of this money. And when part of the reason, let's say you are the head of the Republican National Governors Association, you're going and you're putting money into the campaigns of other governors or other senators or whatever to try to bolster their chances of getting elected or whatever. So 2 years later, you're the presidential candidate. That guy now owes you. Mm-hmm. So that's a wonderful, jumping off place to be in, particularly when you have all that money that you can bestow upon all these candidates across the country.
Yeah, and, maybe I'm being naive about this, but it boils down to, isn't this a case of the fox watching over the hen house? I mean,
well, it's almost the fox with feathers in his mouth watching the hen house.
Yeah.
And this is where the problem really lies, is that, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, the campaigns weren't raising these kinds of monies. As much as I hate that the politicians get away with a lot of this, on their side of it, is that if you wanted to run for office, you have to play that game. So you've got to go out and raise all of that money. Occasionally you get a blip where somebody doesn't raise a lot of money and is still able to defeat somebody, whoever won the Senate seat or the congressional seat down in Virginia that Cantor had. I don't think the guy who won that seat had anywhere near as much money as Cantor did. But those are the rarities and not the general rule. And particularly if you're running for president, it's it's $1 billion.
Yeah, or more. This one's going up to be the biggest one yet. 2012 was the biggest. Now 2016 is going to be the big. I mean, it's getting ludicrous. And we the people don't have a chance. There's a lot of really great people in this country who probably could step up and serve we the people a whole lot better than those who have their own vested interests in themselves and their cronies.
Oh, absolutely. And it used to be that people would worry whether they had a skeleton in their closet before before they would go run. Sometimes the skeleton had nothing to do with their ability to serve. But now that's almost like secondary compared to the amount of money that you've got to be raising. Even if you're independently wealthy, you still have to raise money. You couldn't fund that campaign on your own.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous. And what's happened, too, is, the American public's really come to accept this as the way the game is played, and in many ways are kind of giving up hope with either party.
Well, absolutely, because both parties are playing the same game. It's each one has their own separate, pot of donors that, they have to go to raise this money. And, I think that's what happened is that sometimes, whatever that analogy is that if you threw a frog into a boiling pot of water, he would jump right out. Or compared to the frog that sits in there as the water heats up.
Yep.
So you acclimate to it, you become accustomed to it. And I think that's why we decided to talk to it as bribery, even though it's legal, because it really is shocking if you looked at it with fresh eyes. You'd go, whoa, why is this costing so much money to get elected to a job? The highest paying job there is the president, at $500,000 a year? Mm-hmm. And it's costing you 2,000 times, if not more,
right.
to get the office?
Yeah. This is just, it's all on its head right now. And the problem is, I think most people understand this, that we've got this problem, but they don't know what to do. And again, in our system, the potential for change is held with the voters. But again, who are you going to vote for when all you've got is maybe the lesser of two evils?
Right, and probably the disappointing thing that I see in the government right now is what the Supreme Court has done, because those are 9 people who don't need to run. They don't get elected. They get appointed and they get confirmed, and once they're in for life. And that check and balance has kind of failed because it's allowing this kind of thing where they should have been limiting the ability for them to raise money and enforce the law as it was passed. Now what they've done is they've gone in the opposite direction and opened it up. So it's going to make it harder because we're going to have to get the politicians themselves to agree or get the right group of people elected to go in there and change those laws so that they're not so self-serving.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we'll continue this discussion on legalized bribery after the break. All right, everybody, welcome back. You are listening to America Now. John Higgins joining me this first hour, and we're talking about a little thing going on in this country that's not such a little thing anymore. PACs, super PACs, and the influence of corporations and private individuals contributing lots and lots of money to basically buy this system. This is a problem that needs changing. And, John, this is a cyclical problem that comes around, and it seems like it's kind of here to stay. But you mentioned something when you were talking right before the break about checks and balances. Maybe we need to go back and kind of get a history lesson about the Founding Fathers, because they'd be rolling in their graves right now about their love of corporations.
Oh, absolutely. One of the reasons that there was the American Revolution was because of corporations. The real Boston Tea Party, which I guess the modern day Tea Party wants to relate to, was really dumping the tea from the East Indian Tea Company. That was one of the few corporations that even England allowed, because the government of England really didn't like the idea of corporations, and they had sweetheart deals in terms of taxation and duties that were punishing the colonists. So they went and they threw all the tea from the East Indian Tea Company off the side of the ship. They probably would have done it in Philadelphia and New York, but the governors in those states had them get the boats out of there. So that was how angry the colonists were over that entire system. And it should be noted that most of the shareholders in the East India Tea Company were the members of Parliament over in England.
Yeah.
So it was extremely incestuous. Mm-hmm. So when the American Revolution is successful and they're sitting down trying to do, the Constitution, well, first the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution to fix any of the other problems, it wasn't that they left corporations out by mistake. Corporations in the early days were something that were really looked down upon. They were extremely limited. They were limited in purpose, and they were limited in time. You had to get a special charter from a state to be able to create a corporation.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting these days, too, the corporations' influence in our country. And many of the corporations now, John, are multinational corporations that are working to give their monies to influence what's going on in this country.
Well, if you think about it, they almost are their own government. They may be, underneath one government, one country's government or another primarily, but in reality, when they become multinational, they get to pick and choose which country's laws they're going to basically, be chartered under and how they're going to be controlled. That's why we have all this money sitting offshore, because they find, a better place to place the money. And today they are like a permanent entity. They are not limited. And back in the old days, it was actually a criminal offense for a corporation to give any money to a political campaign.
Yeah, that's laughable these days. And it's interesting, too, back to the Koch brothers again, it's ironic that they've basically helped to create the present-day Tea Party movement, which is very interesting to me, since that was, as you're saying, something that was a result of the taxes imposed to protect a corporation by the British Parliament. Interesting.
Right. Well, and you and I have talked about how things have become very George Orwellian,
Mm-hmm.
Hate is love, war is peace. Yeah. And, if you take over the name of something and then you change the definition of it, you can really confound anybody trying to decipher what exactly you're doing. And corporations, I think we've discussed this as well, their whole purpose is to create profit. Yeah. They are not concerned about what, they'll say they're concerned about being a good citizen, only to the extent that they can be punished. And as a former prosecutor, there were a few cases where what we would do if a corporation had done illegal acts, there was illegal dumping, or they weren't paying taxes or fees properly, we would allow the corporation to plead guilty, right, as though it was a person, but there was no one to lock up. So what you did was then you assessed, a fine against them. And the guy on the federal level who came up with that, I wasn't on the federal level, was really Chris Christie. We had a problem with the hospitals up at Newark, and he allowed them to plead out where they would have a monitor. And the monitor was going to get was paid $1 million a year to monitor their operations. And guess who it was? It was Ashcroft, who had been his U.S. Attorney General boss.
Wow.
Yeah.
It used to be, too, that government used to have controls over the corporations, so that those corporations in the beginning were to hold those shareholders accountable. But nowadays, isn't it, John, they're basically used to shield those shareholders from liability.
Right. When I was in law school, it was shocking to me because I believe corporations were done because of their size. It wasn't done, they're not created due to their size alone. It's done so that it's a protection, so that the shareholders and the investors, they can't be personally liable for what the corporation does. It's actually a shield today. It's it's not like a badge of honor. It's to protect these people so that, they can't take their private assets.
Yeah, and we've seen what that's led to in this country, unfortunately.
Right. And then there's been this other confound in the last 30 years with leveraged buyouts and all those other things. So a healthy corporation, they sell as a garage sale, so they make more money off it. So now all these corporations are also running in a different way.
Yeah, and of course then, all of this ties into Wall Street as well, John. All these investment banks and bankers. All of these people are in it at the same level.
Absolutely. There was another prohibition in the early days, is that a corporation couldn't buy shares of another corporation. So that would end all the investment banking.
Yeah.
Well, there was no banks really like they are today at all. I mean, Jackson had that problem in the 1820s. He was getting rid of the National Bank.
Yeah. I mean, and now we've got all these mega corporations out there versus the small businesses. How are they going to compete? We've got the Walmarts with the little hometown shops, and Home Depot and Lowe's and the little hardware stores.
And you would think that people who would be in the modern Tea Party would be all upset about all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Politicians all the time say it's the small business owner that drives the economy.
Right.
Well, I don't know how many Home Depots you have around you, but I've got a bunch of them.
Yep.
I got Lowe's right next door to them. So the guy who had the hardware store down the street, he's gone. There's no way he can compete with those people.
Right, yeah. It used to be you knew, half your neighbors and friends and stuff were business owners, and they could make a living doing that. These days, good luck. Even Ace, which used to be one of the bigger ones, I mean, they're struggling. They're a small one now compared to the Lowe's and the Home Depots. Not to pick on those two, but just as an example, and how are any of us, again, it's all relative, how are any of us as the individuals going to be able to compete at a political level for any of these positions with those people who are the big people tied in with the PACs and super PACs? We can't.
Right, and like you said, in some of them, they're disguised. You can't even find who they are, so that there's all these dealings that are going on, and their agenda that gets played out with all this money. They put out all these campaign ads or ads for their own position that you really don't even hear the other voice. Those were things that were they tried to argue that in front of the Supreme Court, but they really weren't hearing that. And if you only hear one side of the story, you don't think there is another side.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate part. When we come back on the other side of this break, John, let's talk about some possible and practical solutions. There has to be some. There have to be.
Yes.
All right. America Now will continue after the break. All right, everybody, welcome back. You're listening to America Now. John Higgins joins me this hour. We're talking about the corrupting evils of money in politics, unfortunately. And John, let's talk some solutions, because I think one thing people need to realize is money in politics is a cyclical cycle. It isn't, this cycle consists of scandals, and you get the new laws, and then the laws break down for some reason after a period of time, and then there's new scandals, and then more new laws. And we've seen this throughout American history from the time, as you mentioned, Andrew Jackson, and I mentioned Teddy Roosevelt, and then we've got the Nixon era. We're sitting here again, and right now, and instead of being all disillusioned, I think we need to grab the opportunity and look at it from that perspective and say, we've got a chance right now to change the status quo that's going on.
Right, and what in my opinion, what happens is that the problems in it become they fester and they grow until they get to the point that it becomes intolerable, and then it has to change. The great thing about the American system that the Founding Fathers did create was it allows for those kind of changes to occur without having to go to revolution. That's why our country has survived and thrived usually after it has had to deal with whatever these cancers are that come up from within. And, the politicians, they really are accountable to the voters. They may get money from the corporations or the PACs or the donors or whatever, but at the end of the day, those entities can't vote. So the vote is really the control that goes there. And complaining to your legislator, your congressman, your senator, your governor, you can even write the president, they do listen to some degree. The thing of it is we have to have enough voices that they realize that if they do not start doing the changes, they will no longer be in office.
Yeah, and I think those changes need to start at the local levels, because if they see it at a grassroots level, change starting to swell up, they're going to pay more attention to that. And again, it's going to have to be the numbers.
Absolutely, and the good thing is we may be coming to a perfect storm in terms of that timing. Because if you think the economy, regardless of them telling us the economy is doing so well, I don't know anybody around me who's saying that the economy is doing real well. Everybody is getting squeezed. So there's all of those people who are unhappy. And then there's been these movements. The Tea Party, in many ways, is capturing a group of people towards the right end of the political spectrum who are angry and unhappy with what's going on, while at the same time you had the Occupy movement on the left side, that they too are upset and unhappy with what's going on. What we need to do, though, is start providing people with realistic, proposals to start trying to change this. I think it was Arizona had made an attempt to try to remedy the Citizens United case by saying that if there was a funding source that came in with one position on, a topic or whatever, that the government would provide the money to equalize the message. And the Supreme Court knocked that down. So at this point, we have to realize that the Supreme Court is not going to help us under the existing laws, under the Constitution. So we're going to have to start thinking in terms of constitutional amendments.
Yep.
And what I would say is that means we need to rethink the entire election process, not do piecemeal and worry about whether a corporation is considered to be a person or not a person. That's just a piecemeal thing, and somebody will find a loophole around that. We need to set up the election process all over again in the country.
Yeah, and it's going to be tough to get that done, but it's exactly what we do need, because we need to remove the receipt of the money by these elected officials for the campaigns. No more PACs, right? No more super PACs that can give out any money.
And these corporations who are keeping money offshore, then they need to be penalized. Not benefit. There's some bills going through now that they're talking about that they're going to give Apple some kind of tax forgiveness for all the money they have sitting offshore. So they're going to lower the amount of money they're going to get from them. It's like, what are you talking about? You tell us that our country is broke, and then in the same token, since you hid the money long enough, now we're going to give you amnesty and let you sneak the money in, and we'll all be happy again.
Yeah, no more of any of that kind of stuff. We need to end all of this type of corruption. And it's okay for you guys to do it, but if you or I did it, oh
my God, we'd be locked up in two shakes.
Yeah, exactly. Probably less than that. One thing that really bugs me too is the way we run the whole election cycle. These whole, supposedly even the debates and stuff. The debates are fine, but quit finger pointing. I am so sick, and I bring this up constantly, but I am so sick of, even when they're running their ads, all they do is tell you what the other guy supposedly does or doesn't do. They never say what they're going to do. Why don't we just get rid of all of this stuff? It doesn't help anyone, especially the voters.
Well, I think it helps recycling people, because when I get those pamphlets, they go right in the garbage. I don't even bother reading, because I laugh and I say that they're saying that the opponent Smothers wears army boots. It's that childish. It's grammar school, campaigning, and you and I have discussed this as well. Or it's I have family values. Well, who's going to stand there and say I don't have family values?
Right.
But whose family values?
Exactly.
So they become nonsensical terms that they use over and over again and spend all of that money on.
Or so many of them even, co-opting religion now and using that as part of their election campaign. Excuse me, there's nothing wrong with that. However, separation of church and state, what happened to that one?
Oh, absolutely. As far as I'm concerned, if a church or religious organization is contributing any kind of money to any kind of political campaign, they're no longer separate, and therefore they should lose all their tax status.
Yeah.
But that's a remedy you can do there.
Yeah.
But in terms of all this other thing with the election cycle, we need to think it down to the point of how the person gets elected. Right. That we're all citizens. We have an obligation to watch the debates. And if you decide not to vote, well, that's up to you. But I think that if you specify there'll be certain dates that the debates are held, and they don't need to raise money for those, they have the networks run them, that would be part of your responsibility as being a U.S. citizen.
Exactly. And those debates are free. Basically, those are provided by the major networks.
And that's the only thing we ever really hear what they're really going to do.
Well, usually, hopefully we hear what they're really going to do, and that is about the only way we can. And, if we got the money out of this, it would really open it up to a lot more people being able to step forward and serve this country. And that's what, again, it was all about. And I keep hammering on this all the time when we talk, but it's about service, being in service, not making a career of this and just getting money and pensions and jets and cars and all this other stuff.
Right. It's a civic duty. Yeah. I mean, that was the whole intent of it. It was gentlemen farmers who would come and serve, you know, and then eventually it expanded broader where the people would go and serve for a couple of terms in the Congress and then go home. George Washington served 2 terms. He could have declared himself king.
Yep.
King George said that because if that man steps down, he'll be the greatest man who ever lived, you know. And Washington stepped down. He didn't try to pass, you know, the rulership of America to any of his descendants.
Yeah, he certainly did not. Term limits. That brings up term limits, John. We need term limits in place.
Right, because the politicians on their own wouldn't do that to themselves.
Of course not.
You know, they enjoy way too much. They shouldn't have these tremendous salaries. Look, $175,000 a year for a part-time job is ludicrous as far as I'm concerned. When I ran the numbers, if you multiply that out, we're spending $110 million in salaries on the elected officials in Washington. Not the bureaucracy, because those people are really doing work day in and day out. But these, you know, the president's in a different category because that is a full-time thing. But the rest of them, half of them aren't even showing up for the votes.
Yeah, exactly.
And you and I have also discussed that the need is if you campaign on a position, you need to at least express that position when you get there. I don't mean that you lock in it and never change it because that would be silliness. But if you get in and as soon as you're in, you reverse your position, you should be removed.
Yeah, rescind the person. I agree. We're running out of time here. Right, if you have ideas about any of this, please join us. Go to Practical Solutions for America on Facebook or practicalsolutions@gmail.com. Write us. Let us know. Let's get this movement going. We can take America back. All right. America Now continues. Stay with